In the mid-90s, the St. Louis Blues had something every NHL team dreams of: superstar talent. Brett Hull, Brendan Shanahan, Curtis Joseph, and yes, even Wayne Gretzky wore the blue note. They also had an ownership group willing to spend money on a winning roster and a shiny new arena. But then came Mike Keenan, a coach known as Iron Mike, bringing with him a hard-nosed, old-school style of leadership and a massive ego to match. In just over 2 years, Keenan managed to alienate and drive out every single star on that roster. The man who was supposed to bring a Stanley Cup to St. Louis instead torched the team from the inside. This is the story of how Mike Keenan turned a potential dynasty into a revolving door, and how 4 of the game's biggest stars said, "We're out." Throughout this video, I'll be referring to Jeff Gordon's book titled Keenan, published in the year 2000. If you haven't checked it out, I've included a link to it in the description. In 1994, the Blues qualified for the playoffs for the 15th consecutive season. They were led by stars like Brendan Shanahan and Brett Hull up front, with Phil Housley on D and Curtis Joseph in net. They were hoping to make a deep run that year. Hull just had his 5th consecutive 50-goal season. Shanahan scored 52, and Curtis Joseph received Vezina votes. However, this chronically underachieving core was swept by the Dallas Stars in the first round. This was an embarrassment. Team president Jack Quinn was desperate to bring a Stanley Cup to St. Louis. They spent millions of dollars on contracts, and actually were one of the main reasons that Gary Bettman wanted to introduce a salary cap. It wasn't just contracts, they were funding a shiny new arena. By building a star-studded roster, they turned a mid-sized Midwest market into a hockey town. A Stanley Cup was the ultimate way to repay their fans. But this team needed a shakeup. They were too soft when it mattered, relied too much on their skilled players in an era where you needed grit more than ever. It was just their luck that a power struggle was brewing in America's most powerful city. After 54 long years, Mike Keenan brought a Stanley Cup to New York in just his first season with the Rangers. He had 4 more years on his contract, but a dispute with management led to his departure from Broadway. Keenan had options as a free agent. Detroit was rumored to be interested, but it was impossible to replace Scotty Bowman. The Blues pounced and named Keenan not just coach, but also general manager. He had this to say about his appointment: "I can coach in a more palatable way now. I can surround myself with people who are willing to go the distance. I've realized I can't change people. I can only change the teams they play on." This should have been a warning to Blues fans. What was he going to do with all that unchecked power? How would the players react knowing that their coach could trade them? Keenan immediately got to work, trading the much-maligned Peter Nedved to the Rangers for Esa Tikkanen and Doug Lidster. According to the reports, the real trade he wanted to make was Hull and Nedved for Jeff Bukaboom and Alexei Kovalev. This pretty much foreshadowed his years-long feud with Brett Hull. At first, Hull was a huge fan of the signing. He said, "He is unbelievable. He's so hard to describe. He's the man. He knows exactly what's going on. He knows exactly what it takes. He's got the respect of everybody here." Hull truly believed Keenan was gonna get the Blues over the hump. And Keenan wooed the Blues core early with his charm and approach towards the game. At camp, Hull said, "My perception was this is a guy who is going to make my life hell, and I'm not going to have fun." And it's been the exact opposite. Boy did the honeymoon phase between these two end quickly, but first let's talk about Shanahan and Cujo. Shanahan was a beloved fan favorite in St. Louis. It wasn't just his play on the ice. The ladies loved him because of his looks. The first thing Keenan did to alienate Shanahan was trade away his good friend Craig Janney. At the end of the day, the NHL is a business and Keenan was well within his rights to trade Janney. But the manner in which he carried it out irked Shanahan. Keenan made Janney his whipping boy, calling him soft and mocking his fitness. Finally, he was shipped off to San Jose. Shanahan was trying to help Janney through some personal issues at the time, so this treatment didn't sit right with him. As for his personal relationship with Keenan, it got off on the wrong foot. The 94-95 season was shortened due to a lockout, and Shanahan started the season like many others out of shape, but he also got sick. Keenan had no sympathy and blew up on Shanahan in front of his teammates, even accused Shanahan of riding Janney's coattails for the past 2 seasons. It didn't stop there. Keenan publicly questioned Shanahan's work ethic and threatened to trade the back-to-back 50-goal scorer. Somehow, Keenan's treatment of Curtis Joseph was even worse. In hockey, goalies normally get preferential treatment. They're in a unique position. There's only one of them on the ice, and even when it's their fault, their teammates and coaches are willing to fall on their sword. But not with Keenan. He was merciless towards Cujo. It's a team game. The Blues finished 3rd in the West, but according to Keenan, Cujo lost them their first-round series against the Canucks. The one thing you need to win in the playoffs is goaltending. I feel bad for Kurt. He's not playing very well. He knows it, we know it, and everyone else knows it. He is fighting the puck. This was before Game 7, not exactly a vote of confidence for your goalie. And the Canucks went on to put 5 past Cujo to win. Cujo said, "At the time, it was hard. I let him get to me. He could say I didn't play well in the playoffs that year. I'm mad at myself for letting him get to me. Shanahan was injured in Game 5 and could have helped the Blues win, but most of the blame was placed on Cujo. He played his last game as a Blue and was traded to the Oilers. Like a door hitting you on the way out, Keenan took one final jab at Cujo. He said, "He had the lowest fitness rating of any professional athlete we ever tested. But that didn't bother me as much as the fact he didn't improve by the end of the year." Hall also caught flack for his performance, even though he scored 6 goals. Keenan questioned his leadership, comparing him to Trevor Linden. He said, "You can see Trevor's physical attributes and you can see Brett Hall's physical attributes. But you can't see the intrinsic attributes unless they do something extraordinary. Hall just wasn't the type of leader that Keenan craved. He was too bashful, too much to handle for Keenan's ego. Keenan preferred a guy like Messier, someone that didn't question his extreme methods." The offseason of upheaval didn't stop there. After a long season of conflict, Keenan shipped Shanahan to Hartford for Chris Pronger. Now in hindsight, I think it's fair to give Keenan his flowers for this one, but at the time the fans in St. Louis, the ladies in particular, weren't happy. Shanahan was surprised. He thought there was a chance for reconciliation. He said, "There was some friction between Mike Keenan and I, but I felt the way I came on in the second half of the season and the playoffs, that Mike and I had a professional understanding of each other." Unfortunately for Shanahan, Keenan saw things differently. He said, "How can we pay him top line money if he's not playing on the top line, which is ridiculous logic." Shanahan was a 50-goal scorer playing behind an 80-goal scorer in Hall. Just because he wasn't on the top line doesn't mean he wasn't a top line player. You never heard the Penguins complain about paying Malkin more than Crosby just because he was technically their second line center. The second reason given for trading Shanahan was to get the payroll under control, but this also didn't make sense. Keenan then paid Pronger, added Noonan, and Shane Corson, increasing their net spend after the Shanahan trade. The fans hated these moves, and Hall echoed their sentiments. He said, "They're pissed off because they took Shanny and Cujo in. They were part of the St. Louis family." Keenan tried to play it off by saying he didn't know how important these two were to the city, but the damage was already done. In the 95-96 season, the divide between Hall and Keenan only deepened. By now, you've probably heard the story of how Keenan benched Howard Chuck in a game against his former team, the Sabres. Howard Chuck's family made the drive from Ontario, including his dying grandmother. Keenan didn't care and scratched him anyways, all just so he can get under his skin. He also benched Hall for long stretches of that game, and the Blues lost 5-2. Afterwards, Hall said, "His folks were there. He played there. That's not something I would consider very respectful for a Hall of Famer. Hall did something commendable here. He stood up for his teammate." Keenan's ego couldn't handle it, and he stripped Hall of the C. Hall just wasn't his type of captain. He wasn't willing to lay down and take the abuse, or go along with it like Mark Messier. Keenan was about to do the unthinkable. He put Hall on the trade block. He offered Hall to the New York Rangers again, and Hall caught wind of this. He got ahead of it, telling the media, "If I get shipped out, it's because Mike Keenan and Jack Quinn have done it. Why would I want to leave? This is the greatest place in the league to play." The fans rallied around Hall, and this interview brought enough heat on the Blues to keep Hall. The fans were furious with Keenan's treatment of their stars and his tactics. They were underperforming, but Keenan had a trick up his sleeve. On February 27th, he acquired Wayne Gretzky from the LA Kings. I have a full video on Gretzky's strange stint in St. Louis, so make sure to check that out. Link in the description. Gretzky was expected to be the final piece of the puzzle, the key to the Blues finally winning a cup. He was expected to be Hall's setup man, the two greatest goal scorers and the greatest playmaker on a single line. Keenan said, "You'd better fasten your seatbelt. You're in for one hell of a ride." Off the ice, there was hope that Gretzky would finish his career as a Blue. He had a 3-year, $23 million contract on the table, and was known to be house hunting with his wife, a St. Louis native. Unfortunately, it just was too good to be true. For some reason, Gretzky and Hall just didn't have chemistry. Hall found himself trying to force too many passes to the middle, and his shots per game cratered. Keenan was baffled and resorted to his usual tactics of criticizing players publicly. He questioned Gretzky's fitness level, but maybe he was onto something. Gretzky recently admitted his pre-game meal consisted of 4 hot dogs and a Diet Coke. But at the same time, we're talking about a guy with over 2,000 points at this stage of his career. He probably should have been given some leeway. But Keenan had no flex, and the tension began. Gretzky's agent kept him from signing the contract, and in the end, it all worked out in his favor. In the playoffs, Gretzky had a tough series against the Red Wings in the second round. In Game 2, he was on the ice for 4 goals against in just his first 6 shifts. He came out and said, "I stink. It's my responsibility to lead this team, and I consider myself responsible for these 2 losses." Similar to how he threw Cujo under the bus, Keenan came out and threw Gretzky under the bus. He said, "Wayne let his man go twice, and that's pretty much the hockey game." Gretzky would not forget this criticism. The Blues were able to force a 7th game, but Steve Yzerman scored this legendary clapper to end the series. Gretzky wouldn't forget his treatment at the hands of Keenan and ended up signing with the Rangers. He said, "Yeah, it's not easy to play for him. It's tough. It's difficult. I don't think he treated me badly, but I had a choice whether I wanted that or didn't want that, and I chose to move on. Put yourself in his shoes. Obviously, you'd rather go to Broadway, where they actually treat you with respect and reverence. Keenan was scrambling. He tried to replace all the stars he lost. It wasn't just Cujo, Shanahan, and Gretzky. He also shipped out Phil Housley, Doug Lidster, and Peter Nedved. In his third season, Keenan took one more shot at shipping out Brett Hull. First, he sat him in a game against the Avs, a move that shocked the league. Even their opponents said it was an embarrassment to the game. Afterwards, he attempted to move Hull to the Capitals for Sergei Gonchar and Jason Allison. But ownership stepped in and nixed the deal. Investors finally stepped in once the ship was already sinking. The Blues were 15-17-1, a far cry from contenders. Keenan was fired, but the damage was already done. The ownership group had to raise over $50 million to keep the operation afloat. And to make matters worse, Hull left the team 2 years later. Keenan didn't directly affect his departure, but his poor job managing a star-studded roster led Hull to leave, seeking greener pastures in Dallas. That's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 25,000 in 2025, and I can do it with your help. Thank you.